backstrokes. Holding water, so much you will know about dolphin kicks, flip turns, dives, and how to find an awesome coach. Hosted by Brian Welter and Tyler Kearns. Holding water is where competitive swimming is learned.
What's up out there, everybody in the swimming world, age group swimming coaches across the country? Hope you guys have a chance to join us again for another great show today. We have a great guest for you guys, and we're excited that Holding Water can continue to be brought to you guys by Commit Swimming. Commit Swimming software is a content management software for teams to help with your training and performance. Commit is trusted by thousands of coaches in 89 different countries, elite training centers, NPA team, college coaches across the country using it. Swim clubs at the USA swimming level use Commit to write their workouts. When these coaches are asked about their experiences with Commit, it's clear teams change for the better when they start using Commit. So coaches out there, you can go to commitswimming.com today to learn more about their product and sign up for a free trial. You will be blown away by the power and simplicity of Commit. We got a link for you guys right there. And I'm joined again today by my friend Brian Welter. Brian, what's up, man?
Not too much. Getting ready to go to a swim meet. We got we've kind of changed our format of our swim meets a little bit. We're starting a little bit later. We got a noon start today and running 2 sessions, and gives everybody a chance to have practice. It's not in the meet, and still lets us have the meet for the kids that need to be in the meet. So it's kind of a neat format. It's kind of nice and gives me an opportunity to sleep in if I don't have to do the show, but that's not the case today. So, but it's good. I mean, we're swimming. I don't know. I'm a little worried because I might be Coach January. We're swimming a little better than I was hoping. But we're still pretty tired, so I think we're going to be all right. But on to the show here, we got a guy who I've known for, probably since the mid-'90s, maybe even the early '90s, back when he was still swimming competitively as a post-grad. And then he moved into coaching and coached down in Orlando, and now he's up in Jacksonville. He's been a few different places along the way, and he's got a pretty storied career as a swimmer and now a pretty storied career as a coach. Let's bring on Martin Zubero.
Hey, Martin.
Good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem, man. I was going to say, when did we meet? Probably like in '95, right? When was your last Europeans?
My last Europeans was in July of '97. So,
'97?
Yes.
So we probably met right around then, because I remember we hung out a little bit before you went overseas.
Yes, we sure did. Yeah, I probably would have retired in Atlanta in '96. So that was my third Olympic Games. I had every intention of probably making that my last meet, but it just happened to be that the European Championships were in Spain and Seville the following year. So I was enticed to swim an extra year. And I just basically concentrated on the 100 back and won Europeans, and decided to hang up the suit and get into coaching. So I finished up school in May of '98, and then I went to Patriot in June of '98, not too shortly after, and got into coaching. So
Martin, you had 3 Olympics, is that correct? Am I right?
I went to 3, Seoul in '88, '92 in Barcelona, and '96 in Atlanta. So each one was a little different.
Give us your favorite. What's your favorite? Obviously, I think I know where the one is going to be, but what's a famous or a great story from your Olympic experience that for our listeners out there?
Well, I wouldn't say there's one particular experience. Obviously, winning the gold medal was huge. I mean, that's the number one highlight that I had, because that was the Olympic dream. Put in the work, going out and doing what you have to do, and winning the gold. When you are putting in that much time and effort, and your teammates are doing the same thing, and you feel somewhat lucky when you do get up on top of the podium. But I don't look at it as being the best in the world. I just look at it as accomplishing the goal that I had set out for 4 years to accomplish. Because in '88, in my first Olympic Games, I saw teammates of mine that were winning medals. Anthony Nesty winning the gold, obviously, was the highlight of the '88 Games. But a lot of my teammates, Matt Setlinski, Paige Zamina, Dara Torres, people that I was training with every day at Florida, they were winning. And at that point, I was like, you know what? In 4 years, I should be able to accomplish the same things that they're doing. I kind of put that long-term goal for 4 years to do everything that I possibly could to win the gold. And everything kind of came together and clicked and won on that day.
So, Martin, you were a little bit of a late bloomer, weren't you? I mean, when you came out of bowls, you weren't a rock star, right? I mean, you kind of blossomed more at Florida than you did really in high school, right? Is that correct?
Yes. I would probably say that I was not heavily recruited out of high school whatsoever. Florida and Texas were the only two trips that I went on, and those were really the only two places that recruited me. And I went to Texas on a recruiting trip, and I loved it. And I went there with my team, Anthony Nesty and John Dennison, were teammates of mine at Bowls. We all went to Texas together, and John Olson was there too, who was an Olympic gold medalist, and in '92 and '96. And I remember we went on our trip, had a great time, and I remember John Olson and we had a great time and got to know each other. And I remember right before we left, I was just like, "You gonna come to Texas?" And I was like, "Yes." And he was just like, "You gonna go to Texas?" I'm like, "Yeah." And we ended up going our separate ways, and I ended up going to Florida, and he went to Texas, or he went to Alabama, excuse me.
As I say, he didn't go to Texas. Yeah, he went to Bama.
Ended up going to Alabama, but yeah, I was not heavily recruited. I didn't even swim backstroke in high school. So I swam the 200 IM and 500 free. We kind of were flooded with backstrokers that year, and not a lot of 500 guys. So I got thrown in the 500. So in the state meet, I was only fourth in the 200 IM at the state meet my senior year, and the 500 free, I was like sixth or seventh. So
that was swimming for Troy.
And that was swimming for Troy. And back in the day, there used to be a time trial the day after the state meet where you could do, all the non-high school events and whatnot. And it just happened to be that I swam the 200 back, and I'd never really swum a 200 backstroke ever. And they ran through the events twice. And I remember I swam the 200 back on the first time through, and I just missed the senior national cut in the 200 back. And then when they ran the events again the second time through, I ended up making the cut. So that was kind of my breakthrough moment, I guess you could say, with backstroke, was that time trial the day after the state meet.
Well, that's
senior year.
That was my senior year. And then senior nationals ended up being in Mission Bay in the spring of '87, and went to senior nationals, and I scored. And actually myself and then Greg Burgess, he was only in ninth grade at the time. He made senior nationals as a ninth grader, and he scored. We ended up making consolation finals in the 200 back at seniors, and then junior nationals was like a week later at the aquatic center, and ended up winning the 2 IM and 4 IM at junior nationals. So and then kind of from there, that's kind of when my career kind of picked up a little bit once I graduated high school and got to Florida. So like you said, Brian, I was a late bloomer. I was not I would say my technique was really good. My work ethic was really good, but I had no strength or muscle of any kind. And I really didn't get that until after I got to Gainesville.
I think that's something that we still see a lot as age group coaches, is young guys that are late to the game. And Brian and I actually had a conversation about that this week, about keeping those guys engaged in the sport and how we continue to help those guys see, when they're ready to take those steps and decide they want to take swimming seriously. Just because boys tend to have a little bit longer to make that decision to be as serious about this sport. I think it's really important for age group coaches to understand that, they have to kind of walk those guys through until it's time for they feel not the obligation, but they feel the ownership of taking the sport seriously. And whether it may be from, like you said, physical strength, or just they're not ready yet to train like they're capable of training. I think that's important. But one thing before we get into the workout real quick, I think it's always neat when you said, talking about being an Olympic gold medalist, it's like the one thing out there, because if you're a national champion, you're a year later, you're a former national champion. The one great thing I think about being an Olympic gold medalist is you're always going to be an Olympic gold medalist. It's not, they never say former Olympic gold medalist. It's always
being president.
yeah. You're always got that that award. And so that's, certainly an incredible experience for you. And I'm sure that's translated into how you prepare your athletes some, and the things that you remember that you did as a swimmer. And so what I want to transition this to is kind of what it's like, as a coach, preparing kids for high level meets like that, and how you approach that.
Well, I think, as an athlete, you kind of take away a lot of the experiences that you had, and you try to implement that with your teams. And I kind of have done that to a degree. You can't treat them like they're Olympic athletes by any means. Kids in your group have way different goals. Some of them, it's, the social aspect, on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got kids that want to swim at a very high level and get to, the collegiate level, or even to the world class level. So you got to kind of, work your, coaching experience with, every single kid in that spectrum. You can't treat them all, like they're going to be world class swimmers. So I think that's one of the things that you kind of got to get in tune with your athletes is, what are their expectations, and try to get them to reach their goals, whether it's getting them to try to make their first senior national cut, or trying to get them to make their first senior champ cut. So it's, you got to get in tune with them. I would say early on in my career, when I was at Patriot, that was my first coaching experience down in Orlando with Clay Parnell. I probably didn't have that patience early on. I probably wanted every single kid to swim at a very high level. It took me a little bit of time to realize that, every kid is different. Every kid is got different goals. And it took me time to kind of get into that coaching experience. I was very lucky, early on, that I had very great athletes. And Brian, you can attest to this. We had a very good team, for the first couple of years that I was there, and I probably thought that every single year was going to be like that. But,
you're pretty blessed coming right out of the gate. What'd you break a bunch of NAG records like 3 years in a row with 3 different sets of girls, I think?
Actually, I did not coach those girls. That was after I left Patriot. But we did have some really good 13 and 14 boys when I was there. And actually, we were number 1 in the nation 200 free relay. I want to say it was 2000. It was either 99 or 2000. We were number 1 in the nation. I think Brent Arkey might have been on that relay from Sarasota. So, how long
he turned out all right.
But but then, we had some lean years, I guess. I wouldn't say lean, but, not as much talent as we did the first couple of years that I was there. So.
Tyler, we want to get into the workout, and then I have some things I want to throw at Martin once we get done with the workout. But let's get into the main set here.
Yeah, let's go. All right, guys, this is the main set brought to you guys by Commit Swimming. Martin, we're going to turn it over to you and let us take us through this workout.
Okay. No, this is going back from a couple years ago, from our senior group. And I know this is, trying to incorporate it more with the age group level. And there's a lot of different ways that you can cut down on this. So, luckily for me, the last couple of years, I've had some pretty good butterflyers that have come through our program. Cole Crane, who's now a sophomore at Texas, Jace Crawford, who's a freshman at Florida. Those are probably the 2 best flyers that I've had come through. And then we've got some younger swimmers as well that are kind of coming up through the ranks that are 13, 14s are pretty good at the moment.
Martin, before you get going on this, I typed this one in, and so I see you get up there, fly back. So basically, this is the butterflyers do butterfly, the backstrokers do backstroke.
Correct.
Is that how this goes? Okay.
Yes. And I think, going back to the way that I used to coach, when I was early on in my career, I was probably guilty of doing a lot of those longer fly sets of going hundreds and 200s and repeats and things along those lines, and seeing strokes just going to the wayside and really falling apart and whatnot. And I really needed to think about how I was going to, change those sets a little bit so that, you could still have an intense set without their strokes going away completely. So if you look at the main set, as you can see with the 150s, kind of alternating between free and stroke the whole way through with a little bit of rest in between. But you can see the farthest thing that we have going fly at any one time is, just that third set of where they're going 75 free, 75 fly. I mean, I rarely do repeats of 100 flies of any kind. I think it's so important to hold on to those strokes, counting strokes, trying to hold that stroke count on every single lap, and really trying to get the kids to think about that as opposed to just swimming repeats of fly where stroke counts are just going up big time. I don't think it's very productive. So that's kind of one of the main reasons why I put that set on there. Just get
Mark, we got a question here from Mark from well, used to be at Santa Clara, but now it's across town. But Mark's asking, how would you modify this for age group swimmers if you're going to do this, say, with your 11 to 14-year-olds? Would you make it hundreds where you're going 75-25 and then 50-50, 25? How would you change this around a little bit to make it? Because clearly my 11-year-old girl that swims the 100 fly doesn't need to do this set, I don't think.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, this is not something that I would do with the age groupers by any means. I wouldn't make them go almost 8,000 yards of anything, but there's ways that you can cut it down. Obviously the intervals are going to be a little bit slower, but you could make it 75s or 100s where, if you're doing 75s or you're going like 10 75s of 50 free, 25 fly, and trying to have them hold that same stroke count on that last 25 butterfly on every single one. Same thing with 100s. You could go 10 100s, where you're alternating between 25 75 and 50-50, that kind of thing.
I see Joe jumped in here with, you could go 2 to 3 instead of going 5.
Yes.
So like 2 or 3 instead of going 5, just bump it down to where you're bringing that yardage down. I like the idea and I love the concept. I do a lot of that kind of stuff with my kids.
How much?
You got to get the kids to think about what they're doing as opposed to just doing laps and just kind of wandering aimlessly. I think stroke count's important, and not just on butterfly, but I think on backstroke too. And me being a backstroker and the way that I trained, especially in yards, I never counted my strokes inside the flags. I always counted my strokes for the entire lap. So I just hit that, that same stroke count on every single lap. And way back in the Stone Age, it was the hand touch on backstroke when I swam through college. So stroke count on backstroke was huge, especially for me, where I really favored turning on my left hand going into the wall on a flip turn. And it's important that you're hitting that stroke count, so you're hitting on your good hand. And I could turn on my right hand too, but I was not as fast as I was with my left hand getting there.
So I grew up in Fort Myers and trained with a guy that was, I think, arguably maybe one of the best old school backstroke turners in the world, Derek Weatherford.
Yes.
That change of that rule, that hurt him, didn't it?
That's a funny story. My senior year at NC2As, in the morning of the 200 back, Derek Weatherford was in the heat right before me in the circle seated heats. and he gets in and breaks the American record in the 200 back in the heat before me. And then I was in the heat afterwards. And in the last heat, I beat his time, but since I was representing Spain, I didn't get the American record. They just said, and Martin Zubero broke the pool record. It was really funny. But I think, as far as that rule goes, my senior year, I broke the NC2A record in the two back at 142.8. And then they made the rule change. And then the year after it,
what year was that? When
that
did
was
we change that rule?
That was March of 91 was NC2As. And I think April of 91 was when they went to the no touch rule. So it was really funny that, the year I broke the world record in the 200 bat because of the rule change, but I lost the NC2A record because the rule change also. But I think that was a fair trade.
Yeah, you'll take that.
Not having the no touch rule. So, but I think that changed backstroke completely. In some ways, I thought that for me, I was very, very good with the crossover turn. And, most of the people that I swam against, they were not very good with crossover turns. So I would say that, some people were good. I would say like the Jeff Rouses and David Burkhoffs and swimmers like that, they were very good at it. But a lot of the European swimmers, they were not very good with the crossover turn. So I think that rule kind of hurt me when it came to World Championships and Olympics. I think it favored those swimmers a lot more.
So Martin, when you're doing a set like this, you're taking athletes through some of these varying distances of fly, and you're talking through holding stroke count. That's something I do the same. I do a lot of stroke count on fly. I do it more on fly and breast than I do on backstroke typically.
Yes.
But how much do you incorporate kick count underwater in a set like this now versus in the past?
I kind of get them to think about, using the dolphin kicks off the wall, like 3 to 4. We do a lot of recovery freestyle where we do a lot of open turn freestyle where, getting them to touch with a hand touch and work on streamlines and keeping it 4 dolphin kicks off every single wall with a lot of our easier freestyle sets. One of the things I think is, especially in a 100 fly, and I'm thinking more, I guess, high school swimming. And even when you get to age group swimming, where you're talking about 50 flies and 100 flies, that one, if you're taking one extra kick off a breakout or off a turn, that is a huge difference to where you are going to be as far as getting your hands on the wall on a turn or a finish in a 100 fly. I mean, as coaches, you've probably seen in a race where kid blows a turn where they're too long going into the wall or they're jamming a finish or a turn. And just taking that one extra kick or taking out a kick is going to help them get in and off the walls a little bit quicker. So stroke count's important, but taking that one extra kick or taking out a kick, it's going to help them hit those walls a little bit better. One of the things that, and I know a lot of teams do it, and I've never done it, is, stroke counts really are affected when you put on the suits. So I think it's one thing, especially if you're doing like a dive 25. And I think a stroke count is definitely going to be different when you have a suit on and when you don't have a suit on, by probably like one stroke at least. So I think one of the things that, that I would like to do is, have that practice or two where they put an old suit on, just so they can work on stroke counts off a dive 25. So that they are hitting the right amount of kicks and the right amount of strokes to get through that first 25 and even that second and third turn and then the finish on the end, just so that they know how many kicks, how many strokes that they have to take with the suit on, because that is going to change when you're tired, when you just have a drag suit on, if you have a suit on, if you shave, all those things are going to change how many strokes that you take in a lap. So that's kind of the mindset that I'm thinking, that I think it's kind of important for them to think about how many strokes it's going to take in the middle of the season and how many it's going to probably take at the end of the season when they put that suit on, they're shaved and tapered.
So you were talking about the Joe. Go back up a little bit on that set. Go back up to the warm up. So that 800 straight, you're going 200 free, and that's just regular 200 free doing flip turns, and then they're going 200 open turns. So is that freestyle or is that choice or what?
And that's usually freestyle. That's kind of what I was talking about before, where they're coming in doing the open turn, really focusing on the streamlines, doing the dolphin kick, so they're coming up the walls outside the flags. Kind of get them to think about it, they're coming in, they're getting that air, and it makes it a little bit easier for them to stay down longer on those streamlines coming off the wall. Really kind of think about that. So.
I see Joe put up here, so we kind of went through that main set. Joe put up here, so this kick set with fins, are we doing fly, are we doing back, or is it just depend off their butterfly or backstroker?
Yeah, with the fins on, usually flying free. The backstroker's going streamline kick on their back. With that, I mean, the first set of 10, obviously 45, and then trying to pick up that tempo on the second set of 10. Obviously this is from a couple of years ago, so it was. I probably let them do their choice on it, but I think it's real important. With those fins on, I don't look at it as underwater kicking. I guess I look at it as accelerating through those breakouts a little bit more when they use those fins. But we use the fins, quite a bit. I would say every single practice we're using fins.
So I just went and looked. This was January 25th of 2019.
So 2 years, almost exactly 2 years ago. So this is probably one of the last real hard practices in our phase as we were getting ready for senior champs, because I think senior champs were in February 2 years ago. I'm sure.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Cool. That's good stuff, Martin. Thanks for sharing that workout with us. Coaches out there, you should be able
to. Just finishing up here, something you've got down here that I actually don't do anymore, but I used to do a lot. Double arm backstroke. So do you do that with a freestyle kick? Do you do that with a breaststroke kick, or you just let them do whatever they want with that? Like I used to do a lot of double arm backstroke with a breaststroke kick, and I saw this on your workout, and it reminded me of that. I haven't done it in a really long time. You just trying to loosen up the shoulders there, just trying to,
And I would say this is probably one of my staple warm downs that I do probably 2 to 3 days a week. Just to kind of, stretch out those shoulders, and I don't recommend doing a whole lot of double arm backstroke. So it's just, it's good.
Why is that? You think
a little bit, but I think it puts a lot of, it puts a little bit of stress on there if you do a lot of it. Also, if you're with a double arm backstroke, there's not a lot of rotation. So I don't think it's the best drill in the world. I think it's more for to stretch out those shoulders a little bit. But I think it really flattens the stroke, which obviously is not good on backstroke. Probably my best drill that I do with backstroke is 3-stroke 6 kicks. And I do a lot of that freestyle and backstroke. That's probably the one that I go to the most to get the kids to think about shoulder and hip rotation is 3-6.
So when you're doing the 3-6, I got a question. We talked a little bit with Russell Mark about backstroke and about hip position when you're doing that. So when you're doing that 3-6, do you want those hips to be rotating, or do you want those hips to be fairly flat and the rotation to come basically from the belly button up?
Man, I just really get them to think about, getting on freestyle, getting chin on the shoulder, and getting the opposite hip up on the surface. And then with the backstroke, trying to get them to think about getting their palm down up top on the catch as opposed to that palm facing up. You have that palm facing up, those hips are going to be really flat. You turn that hand down, and those hips are going to go where they need to go on that 36 drill, getting that palm down a little bit. So, a lot of, I think that rotation is super important, and trying to get them thinking about getting outside the shoulder on that 3-6 drill, and not getting obviously behind the head, because that's all wasted motion from behind the head to outside the shoulder. Just kind of get them make that catch where they need to up top, and having that leverage as they're getting that palm down. So Getting back to the our backstroke, I think the one thing that is good about it is that when when you do it, and I don't use it very much, is really thinking about getting those fingertips out as they're pushing through on the finish. That way they have that surface area, to really push through the back end of that stroke. So I really try to get the kids to think about getting those fingertips out and not having those fingertips up. Because when you have those fingertips up, you're just pushing that water towards the finish of the stroke, and you're not getting anything out of that pool. So I'm really trying to get the kids to think about getting the fingertips out as opposed to the fingertips up, which is not good.
So one of the things several years back, I don't even know if you remember this, but at NCSA juniors, I was really struggling with one of my real good athletes that was a pretty good backstroke. He's a 48 guy, I think, at the time. And I had you talk to him a little bit because I was really figuring I was having a hard time. And one of the things that stuck with me was you talked about rolling through backstroke. You talked about using that roll through your shoulders, and I guess it kind of brings me back to kind of the conversation we had with Russell Mark is when you're talking about rolling through your shoulders, the way I envisioned it was that your head's back just a little bit, your shoulders are open just a little bit, and you're using that roll through.
Right.
I mean, where do you think your head position needs to be, and how do you just kind of explain that to me again? Because it's been that was 5 years ago now.
Golly, I vaguely remember that conversation.
That was with Wes Olmsted.
That's right. So, and I think,
but I mean, just talk about that concept. I don't really care about that specific conversation, but I mean, just the idea of rolling through the backstroke. I liked that idea and the way that you talked about that because it helps me explain to my age group athletes how to generate that tempo and how to maintain that tempo as opposed to just trying to talk about tempo. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. And when I'm thinking about rolling on the stroke and I look at backstroke as being, it's like a machine, and there's no stopping parts on the stroke as opposed to like brushstroke and butterfly where your hands are, brushstroke in particular where you're having the glide and the hands are stopping out in front. On backstroke, it's like a machine, it's like a windmill. And that rotation, that rolling on the stroke, those hands are moving the entire time. Even when you're finishing the stroke, at least when I swam it, is that your hands are not stopping when you finish the stroke. Your hands, you're finishing through. And like I was talking about before, when you have your fingertips up, you got your thumb up as well, so that you're finishing that stroke and your thumb is getting right towards the end of the stroke and your hand's coming right back up. It is not stopping as you're finishing, so that you're finishing, that hand is already coming up and you're kind of keeping that tempo going. The moment that your hands stop, your tempo is gone. So I try to, get into that feel where you're getting into that stroke, you're making that hand entry outside the shoulder, you're accelerating through the stroke, and as soon as you're finishing that stroke, that hand is coming right back up, which I think is super important. So you want to finish your strokes, but you got to make sure that your hand is getting right back up on that recovery real fast. So I think that's what makes a real good backstroker is, obviously keeping that tempo going and not holding that finish very long, getting that hand back up into that recovery motion with that thumb up. The moment that you finish your stroke and you let your thumb go down on your finish, you're stopping on your stroke, and that is not good. Hope that makes sense.
So Martin, one way that here I try to explain it to my guys, my age group kids, is like if you were to look at spokes on your bicycle and they're at opposite ends of the wheel, once you start going in backstroke, if you watch those spokes from over the top, they're not going side to side. They're not rotating side to side. Like people talk about rotating in backstroke. I think there tends to be a misconception that we want you to bounce from side to side. But that if you watch the spokes on that bicycle, they're going to always stay at opposite ends. And as long as the bike is going and the faster and faster that the wheel turns, the faster the bike is going to move. So if you can keep your hands moving at that rate without allowing them to slow down or catch up to each other, and you can keep those hands rotating in that direction, in the opposite, the opposite direction that you are leaving from. So wherever your feet are facing, you're driving those hands rotating in an upward direction. Is that similar to kind of how you would explain that to your guys?
Yes, I think that's an important analogy, and especially with age group swimmers, you got to be able to relate to them and have those analogies. And talking about the bicycle spokes, that's one thing. When you think about hand placement, you're thinking about like the hands of a clock, and trying to have those hands at 11 and 1, which I think is real important. And then Brian, you're asking about head position, and I think head position goes a lot with what I think is the number one rule in backstroke is that you have to be relaxed on your back, and keeping that chin back, which is real important, and keeping that head still is huge. And when you have that head position back and you have it still, you are relaxed. And the moment that you're pulling your chin down on your chest, you are not in a relaxed position. And it's real important that when you have that chin down, you're kind of squinched up with your upper body, and you can't rotate with your shoulders. When you're relaxing, you can kind of put that head back, those shoulders kind of open up a little bit more, and it makes that rotation a lot easier. So you have to have that nice relaxed head position, and because if you don't have that, you're missing out. You're definitely not going to swim as fast.
So moving on a little bit.
I might be wrong. I might have been one of the things that I talked about with you when we had that conversation, is that the more you relax, the more you open up top. I think that is so important. The moment that you pull that head down, everything kind of comes down a little.
No, you definitely talked to Wes about having that head back and opening the shoulders up and using those open shoulders for that rotation and being able to roll through that stroke by keeping that spine straight and keeping that head relaxed. I mean, that was definitely a big part of that conversation. I don't think he swam any faster, but I don't think that was your fault.
There's no doubt that head position and that shoulder position has a dramatic impact on your hip alignment in the water too. Right. I mean, if that chin is pinned down and you're tight through here and that's going to make you even heavier in the core of your body from your chest to your knees. It's going to sink. I mean, there's just no way. When you see a kid do spin drill and they lift that head up a little bit and they're trying to spin those hands, they're going to sit down a little bit deeper in the water in their hips. And that's something definitely Russell talked about, like a guy like Ryan Murphy, who I'm not saying every age group kid should be taught to swim backstroke like Ryan Murphy, although it's technically very, very good. He does a great job of keeping his hips up in contact with the surface when he swims backstroke. And I don't think there's any doubt that head position and shoulder position and rotation have a dynamic impact on that hip position.
And I agree with your point 100%. And as far as head position goes, I think that the best person that has ever done this is Christina Eggers.
Derek Weatherford.
Oh man. As far as the head position, I think Christina Eggers-Eggy, who won the 200 backstroke 3 times, 88, 92, 96. If you go back and watch her swim, her head does not move at all. And she had great rotation and her head did not move at all. And I think that's huge. And when you're swimming like a 50 backstroke or 100 backstroke, and that got to have that crazy fast turnover, but that head's got to remain still. You don't want your head falling where those hands are going when you're swimming. You could keep that head still and just rotate from that shoulder, and really think about bringing the shoulders up out of the water first. I think that's another big thing. A lot of people, they think about their hands. And you got to be thinking about bringing your shoulder up out of the water first. That way you can have that straight arm recovery over the shoulder. You start thinking about your hands, you're just going to look like wet spaghetti and those arms flailing all over the place. And so really thinking about initiating your recovery from your shoulder and not thinking about your hands as they're coming up out of the water.
I mean, are there any elite backstrokers that have bad head position, like that just have really? I mean, that's the one thing I tell mine a lot is like, if you want to be a good backstroker, you've got to have good head position. You just
And believe it or not, there are some backstrokers that have awful head position that are moving all over the place. And I'm just thinking about Carey, who was an '84 Olympic gold medalist. You go back and watch him swim; his head is going all over the place, but he was super strong, and his hips were up way up high on the surface, so he didn't have a whole lot of drag. But if you go back, head all over the place. A lot of the swimmers that I swam against with, they had crazy head position. Vladimir Solkov, who was my big rival in the 200 backstroke for many years, he had his head going on all over the place. But he was, like I said before, his hips were real up high on the surface, and he was very good with his legs, especially with his underwaters. He could hold them a pretty long time. So you can get away with it, but I do think that head position is critical in order to swim very, very fast.
Brian, what's a way you talk to your guys about head position and backstroke, or how do you teach it?
I mean, we've talked about it before on here, but I use a lot of what Martin's talking about. We talk about keeping the head back, staying relaxed, keeping the shoulders open, trying to stay balanced in the water and trying to stay relaxed. And then we work on finishing the stroke and popping the other shoulder at the time we finish the stroke to get into the next stroke. I don't talk about the thumb that much. That's new to me. I'm gonna play with that idea a little bit in the next week or so. But we really talk about the balance. And so going back to the hip position, that's one of the things that I asked him, and we kind of got sidetracked. But going back to the hip position, I mean, do you think there needs to be a rotation? Is there a twist in that kick, or is that kick and has that changed? Because I know back in the day, like we got Derek on here, and back when you guys were swimming, there was a twist in that kick, and we taught that hip rotation with the shoulders. Now it seems like Murphy and those guys have flatter hips. And we talked to Russell a little bit about it, and the rotation is more from the belly button or from the waist up. What do you think about that, Martin? What do you?
Well, I think you got to rotate somewhat, but I think a lot of kids, and when you tell kids to rotate, it's very easy to have them over rotate and getting your hips up almost to where you're on your side, and that's not good either. So I do agree with having maybe a little bit of a flatter stroke. I think that will help out as far as getting tempo going, but I think it's got to be a natural motion as far as getting that rotation in.
So do you think there is a twist in the kick, or do you think
that's a little bit? I think when I swam, I mean, I've seen footage of when I swam underwater. I definitely had a little twist with my kick with that flutter when I was rotating. But it's the kick itself. It's real important because those feet have got to be going the entire time. If you don't have a good kick behind you, you're going to overcompensate with your arms and your shoulders way too much, and that's kind of when you get that bouncy motion on that. So it's more. I would say it's more kind of like a rudder to keep you up on the surface and keeping it nice and smooth. And and you do. I think you have somewhat of a twist in there. But I think as long as you keep those feet moving, you're going to be nice and smooth up on the surface of the water. So I think it's one of those things that, I see an age group swimmer and they're bouncing on that stroke. I don't tell them to think about their, slowing down their hands or keeping that head still, and try to get them to think about having that good, consistent flutter kick behind them, because they have that bounce is going to go away. And obviously that body position is going to be up a lot higher on the surface of the water.
Our buddy John Roy. I like to talk about it with some of my age group guys, and we talked about it before, kind of a pivot.
Yes.
More instead of over, and sometimes when you talk about rotation too much, they do tend to over rotate. And yes. I think what Brian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're just talking about that over rotation leading to a break in the kick. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, like freestyle and backstroke, I try to think about when we're kicking on a board or when we're kicking in a streamline, and you've got a kid that's got a really propulsive kick on a streamline or on a board. I try to apply that to what we're doing when we're swimming. So I want to keep those hips relatively similar to that position when we're swimming as when we're kicking. I'm trying to put those two pieces together. And I feel like that a lot of times when we start talking about rotation in freestyle and in backstroke, that kick changes drastically when you start having that twist, and it becomes less propulsive. And for me, it seems a bit counterproductive. It becomes balance rather than propulsive. And
Right.
and I try to get away from balance. I want propulsive. Let everybody else be balanced. I want to be propulsive. So that's kind of where I'm going. That's kind of where I was going with that. And I guess, I mean, I'm interested to hear both of you guys' thoughts on that idea.
Those hips are important, and no doubt about it. When you're initiating your backstroke kick, you're a lot of age groupers in particular, you're thinking, a lot of them are thinking about kicking with their feet, and they're kicking from the knees down. Your kick is initiating from your hip, and you're really pressing from your hips, and that's going to keep those legs straight. Point your toes a little bit more, as opposed to thinking about your legs driving your kick. It's coming from up top, and getting the kids to realize that your kick is you're starting your kick from your hips and not from your knees. When you start, obviously you start thinking about your legs and your knees, those knees start popping up out of the water. Whereas you're having the kids thinking about kicking from your hips, the lower body position is going to be a lot better, where they're going to be able to drive with that upward and downward part of the kick a little bit more when they're thinking about their hips and not so much what's going down underneath that, if that makes sense.
So I think we're hitting on the three things: the posture, line, and balance that so many coaches talk about on a regular basis when we're talking about these things. And I guess the way I look at when I'm trying to teach backstroke is, when I talk about balance, I talk about it less from a side to side movement, because I do try to key that in as a pivot. But I talk about balance maybe through the entire anterior chain, so that from the kick, that the kick and the rotation in the shoulders work together, and that timing of that kick aids in the timing of that rotation, and then it can help speed up the rotation. So when I talk about balance, I want the propulsive kick so that I can use that to drive everything from the core through the chest, through the shoulders, into that anterior chain, and really think about the balance being a little bit more of the linear position on the surface of the water rather than side to side. Because I don't want them to break up the kick, but I definitely don't want the hips to go here and start breaking up a bouncing stroke like you talked about earlier, Martin. Brian, I think we're probably talking about the same thing, just talking about it a little bit differently. But that's what I love about a show like this, is that we've got three guys who teach it very differently. Martin, you did it a lot better than probably Brian, and I definitely did it better than Brian and I did it as an athlete. But when you're teaching it as a coach, how do you take that experience of, you should listen to me because I know what this looks like at a high level, and how do you transition that into being a great athlete, into being a successful coach?
Well, and I'm going to jump in real quick here. This is something Martin and I have talked about before, and we talked a little bit about this before the show. Is, you talked about how you when you first started coaching a little bit, and I don't even know if you remember this. This was probably 20 years ago, but you talked about how when you first started coaching a little bit, that backstroke was difficult for you to teach kids initially because you just understood how to do it. And some of the other strokes where you had to learn how to do them, and you got coached a lot, like to make the NCAAs and the 200 IM and be able to have that third event.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, and just kind of how that transition went from swimmer to coach, as an age group coach, and now as a senior coach.
Well, I think I was pretty fortunate when I first got into coaching. Like you said, Brian, I was pretty blessed. I had some really great athletes when I started out. So I think patience is huge as a coach and as an athlete. And from the coaching aspect of it, you got to be patient, especially with boys. You got a lot of kids out there that have very, very good strokes when they're young, and they kind of take a little bit of time to fill into their bodies and whatnot, and getting them to swim at a very high level. And that patience is really important. I know I had to do it as an athlete where I was not super successful at the high school level, and I was patient, and my time came. As coaches, we got to be patient as well. You could look at your group and be like, wow, that kid is going to be really, really good, and you just got to be positive with them, and tell them that their strokes are really good, you're going to get better, you keep coming to practice, that kind of thing, and that their time's going to come. So as coaches, we got to do our part with our athletes as far as telling those kids to stick with it. Even if I think everybody is an athlete, they have their up and down moments. It's kind of like a roller coaster, kind of ups and downs. And we all have our great swims, but there's going to be some times where you might get a little bit slower, or you have a bad season, but you got to be patient. And the swimmers have got to be patient, and coaches have to be patient. And everybody has seasons where they don't do well, and where they do great, and every time you have to go back to the drawing board and kind of find out what works as a coach and what works as an athlete. So I think patience is the biggest thing. And that was the one thing I probably had to learn a little bit more about in my early years of coaching. So like I said, I had some great kids growing up, but I had some years where, it was a rebuilding year where I had some really good 13 and 14-year-olds, and they moved on. And then I had 11 and 12-year-olds that I was working with where they were okay, but I was like, you know what? In a year or two, these kids are going to be really, really good. So patience is huge.
So we talked a little bit earlier about that late bloomer, that young man, Brian. We talked about it this week. When you're developing that kid, and just going to give you an example and kind of a way to help young coaches who may have a young kid who's good, and to deal with something like this. Let's say you've got a 13, 14-year-old boy who shows promise. You've identified that by looking at them and seeing what they do in practice, this kid's got some potential if they make a choice to do this really well. And that kid's going through some workouts, and they're, good sometimes, and they're not so good sometimes. And then occasionally they just walk in there and, it just looks like chin in the chest. They're just going to pout that day or not try hard that day. What are ways you engage that athlete, Brian? And I'll go to you first, because I know you and I have talked about this, but what are ways you engage that athlete in practice? Or do you kind of let them feel their way through it until it's time for them to make that commitment?
With me, I think it kind of depends on the kid. I've got a pretty laid back approach to how I deal with my 13, 14 boys. Sometimes it's a little frustrating for them because they feel like I should probably put a little more into them than I do. But I don't think they realize that if I put a little more into them than I do, that it may chase them out of the sport. So I'm trying to balance that a lot with those guys. And then I try to use meets and practices as teaching moments to get them to understand what the expectations are and where we need to go and what we need to do with what it is we're trying to do. So for me, it's kind of individualized, but I really do just try to keep explaining what it is we're trying to do and where we're trying to go. And I try to emphasize potential, because I think right now, back when Martin and I swam, we were told what to do and we did it.
Yep.
And if we went home and complained to mom and dad about it, we got in trouble for not doing it. Now that's not exactly the case. Now if they go home and complain to mom and dad about it, then we got to have a meeting with the parents and we got to talk about everything and, how we hurt their feelings. And I think so it's a little bit different balance, but that's kind of where I go with it. Martin, what when you got a 14-year-old boy that's real good but hasn't figured it out and doesn't know that they got that potential, or doesn't really particularly care if they have that potential at that point, what are some strategies you use?
Well, I think I'm kind of in a position right now where I've got a pretty good group of 13, 14-year-old boys. Personally, I think it's the easiest age group to coach, because you kind of touched on it. You kind of had that laid back approach, and boys kind of take care of themselves. And with what I've seen, I've had some real good boys the last couple of years that have gone on to college, but I have another group that's up right now. They kind of feed off of one another. And what I've seen in the practices is that if you do have a group of them that they want to race, and they're coming in on every single repeat, and and be like, all right, what are we going to go on this one, or what stroke are you going to go on this next round? That kind of thing. They kind of feed off one another. So I think having that laid back approach with those kids is a good way to go. And at that point, you kind of tell them about their potential. And, I think that's real important with age group swimming, is not being too specific with what events they're going after. You kind of still keep it wide open and tell them their potential is like, man, you could be really good at this event. You could be good at the mile. You could be good at 200 fly, 200 back. Eventually get down to being a real good sprinter. And kind of having that communication with those kids and let them know, wow, coach really thinks that I could do a real good job in this event somewhere down the road. So the conversation with those kids, it's got to be positive. And, for the ones, like I was saying about with that patience, if they are kind of hitting that rut, you got to let them know, hey, I know, things are, kind of leveling off right now, but, stick with it. Your time is going to come, and be patient, and, good things are going to happen down the road.
I like it. That's pretty much what I do. And it's, and the thing about it is, once they do figure it out, man, does it get fun,
Yeah.
Once they, once that hits, it's like, wow, okay.
And they're collecting. Yeah, the group that I have of the younger boys, they go at it hard every day. And I think we get to our 14 and under flags meet in March. It's exciting to see how they're going to do at the end of the season, because obviously they're putting in the work. The hard work pays off, and you have that core group of kids that doing the work. That they are going to do well at the end of the season.
It's good
stuff.
stuff.
Guys, man, time has flown. We are 58 minutes in.
Jeez.
Yeah, I looked up a few seconds ago, and I looked at the clock, and it said 58 minutes, and I was shocked. Just a reminder to everybody out there, just wanted to say one more time, thanks to Commit Swimming. Commit Swimming is a simple, powerful workout management software. We think it's the best one on the market right now. It's designed specifically for swim coaches. Go to commitswimming.com to start your free trial today. With Commit, you'll be more organized and see your team improve faster than ever. So coaches out there, take advantage of that opportunity to go check out Commit. It's not going to cost you anything. Martin, man, thanks for coming on today. We really appreciate you taking time on Sunday to join us. Brian, I know you got to meet today. What was that? Go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate it. It's been a blast.
No, we definitely appreciate having you on. I know it was tough to get it scheduled and get it going, but we definitely are glad to have you on, man. And it's great talking to you again. Obviously, you and I, we go back a little ways, so it's always it's always fun to get together. But definitely thank you, and thank Commit. And I, just on a personal note from Commit, I'm going to a meet right now. I've got a practice for my kids that aren't at that meet. I just wrote that practice in Commit. Sent it to my assistant coach. He can pull it up. He can print it. He's going to take it into practice, and they're going to know exactly what they need to do. And it makes it super easy to communicate all that stuff. So that's made my life a lot easier when it comes to that. So definitely, Martin, thank you for being on. And, I appreciate the people who came in here. Seeing Weatherford on here, he doesn't even know what a hero he is to me. He probably doesn't even remember me being a little runt running around worshiping that guy when he was at Fort Myers swimming for Mac. But that was back in the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, him and Trip Schwenk and you were my 3 favorite backstrokers of all time.
Yeah, there were some pretty good years there. Like you said, Trip Schwenk and Derek and Greg Burgess. That was a pretty. I think they were all the same 3 classes and the same class. So yeah, I know they had some battles. I was a few years older than them, but watching them duke it out as age groups, that was something to watch.
Well, we had Trip and Derek right down the road from each other in Fort Myers and Sarasota, so it was like every single weekend we got to watch those 2 guys just beat each other up. I mean, it was crazy back then. I mean, yes. And that Sarasota GLCY rivalry was nuts. I mean,
yeah,
he's calling you an old guy, Martin. But anyways,
getting old. But yeah, those are some really good years. I remember there was one of those Gainesville Holiday Classics where all 3 of those guys were there, and they were just breaking state records and national age group records left and right. That was
that was when it was still OxyChem, right?
Yes, I think so.
That was before it became McDonald's. But anyways, all right, guys, I got to roll because I got to get.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Everybody out there, thanks for joining us. We're going to be off next week. Brian and I both have a meet that we're going to be at next week. So good luck to you guys out there. And got Pro Series. So we got lots of people with stuff going on out there, and we hope to see some fast swimming from all of that. But we'll be back in a couple of weeks with you guys. Y'all have a great rest of your weekend.
Join us on the Swim Monkey.
Swim Monkey TV. On the Monkey.